Obese woman suffered in silence for years, until a cowboy helped her ledger expose everything. The axle pin was the wrong size. I knew it the moment I pulled it out of the wagon wheel, held it in my palm, turned it in the light coming through the livery door. Wrong size. About a quarter-inch too narrow for the bore, which meant it had been wobbling in there since somebody put it in, which meant the wheel hadn't been grinding so much as walking itself loose one rotation at a time. Whoever had installed it either didn't know the difference or didn't care to look. Either way, it was my problem now. I set it on the workbench and got my gauge out. Harlan Prout, who owned this wagon and 6 others like it, was standing near the door with his hands in his coat pockets, looking out at the street the way a man does when the smell of horses offends him, but he still needs horses. He hadn't said hello when he came in. Just pulled the wagon around front and told me the wheel wobbled, and stood there like I was supposed to feel grateful for the information. Axle pin, I said. Wrong gauge. Somebody swapped it at some point, or it was just put in wrong to begin with. He glanced over. Fix it. I'd need to order the right size from Abernathy's. That takes 3 days, maybe 4 depending on the freight schedule out of Hadley. I need the wagon by Friday. Friday was 2 days. I looked at the pin again and then at the bore hole and then at the pile of rod stock on the shelf behind me. I can fabricate one. Take me a day and a half on the forge. Good as manufactured, maybe better. But I'd need to charge you for the forge time and the materials. He looked at me then, not at the pin, at me, the particular way a man looks at something that has inconvenienced him and that he intends to blame for the inconvenience. You're the one telling me the pin's wrong, he said. How do I know you didn't pull a good one and swap it yourself? I didn't say anything to that. There wasn't anything to say to a thing like that. He was the kind of man who makes accusations the way other men make small talk casually, to see what holds, to see if you'll flinch or fold or start explaining yourself. I'd known men like that my whole life. I was 50 years old and I was done explaining myself to them. $3 for the fabrication, I said. Wagon's ready Friday morning early. He looked at the street another moment. Then he walked out. No handshake, no answer. I took his silence as agreement, which it was. My name is Calvin Rourke. I'd been in Morrow Creek for going on 4 years by that October, working the livery for old Griff Chandler until Griff's lungs gave out, and his daughter in Kansas City sent a letter saying the place was being sold. I bought the lease, not the building. I never had enough for the building and kept right on. Shoeing horses, mending tack, fixing wagons and wheel rims and broken singletrees, and whatever else came through the door that was broke, and that a man with the right tools and the patience to use them could put back together. I was good at it. I knew I was good at it the way you know anything after you've done it long enough, not as pride, just as fact. The difference between a shoe that'll hold for 2 weeks and one that'll hold for 2 years is in how you seat it at the heel, how you dress the nail clinches, whether you bother to check the angle twice. I bothered, always had. Most of the horses in Morrow Creek had feet I'd worked on, and I could have told you the history of each one. This mare's left front runs a little hot in summer, so we keep the shoe a touch lighter. This gelding has an old quarter crack that we watch, but that's been stable 3 years now. This draft horse came in with an abscess somebody had let go too long, and we got it drained and packed, and he's been sound since March. Nobody knew I knew those things. They just knew the horses worked. Prout was a good example of the general situation. He brought his wagons to me because I was reliable, and because the only alternative was a man in Haverford who charged more and did less careful work. He'd been bringing his wagons to me for 3 years. He'd never once thanked me. He'd called me a thief before, the previous spring, over a job I'd done on a trace chain that I'd done exactly right and that he'd misunderstood. He took it back eventually, or the nearest thing to taking it back that a man like that manages, which is just not saying it again. I kept fixing his wagons. That was me. I was the man whose name people couldn't quite recall until their horse went lame, at which point they suddenly remembered it very clearly. I ate supper alone every night. I don't say that the way a man says something he wants you to feel sorry about. It's just the shape my life had taken, same as the shop had its shape and the bunk in the back room had its shape. You get used to the outlines. You stop noticing what's absent until something crosses your path and shows you the gap. Morrow Creek had about 200 people that fall, maybe a few more counting the homestead south of town. It was built around the Borden trading post that had been there 20-some years, and it had grown just enough since to have a school, a church, a doctor who drank more than he should, a saloon, and a town council that met every second Tuesday and spent most of its time disagreeing about the road to the North Pass. Nessa Birch ran the dry goods store, had run it for 4 years, since her husband Warren died of a fever he caught helping clear debris after the spring floods. She kept the store the way Warren had kept it, maybe better: shelves orderly, chalk prices clear and fair, measure honest. She was a large woman, not tall, wide through the shoulders and the middle, the kind of build that makes some people feel entitled to comment. I'd heard it around the livery and at the saloon. I don't repeat it. It's the kind of thing I find genuinely hard to stomach. The way you find something hard to stomach when you've heard too much of it your whole life about people who didn't deserve it. I went to Nessa's store every Thursday for my weekly supplies. Coffee, dried beans, occasionally salt pork, lamp oil, whatever I needed. She knew my order before I got to the counter most weeks. Sometimes we talked a little, the way you do when you're a regular somewhere, and the proprietor has the kind of mind that doesn't waste itself on the weather when there's something more interesting to discuss. She'd read more than most people in town. She remembered what she'd read. We talked once, for nearly 20 minutes, about a book on Pacific navigation I'd found at the bottom of a barrel at an estate sale 2 years prior, and she'd read the same book and had things to say about it that I hadn't thought of. She was sharper than people gave her credit for. That's the kind of thing you notice when you're used to being invisible yourself. The Thursday I'm talking about was early October, cold enough that I could see my breath in the livery that morning. I finished Prout's axle pin, took me from sunup until about noon, and it was a good piece of work, better than the original, I'm not shy about saying so, and tested the wheel 4 times before I was satisfied. I went to the store around 3 in the afternoon. There was a man at the counter when I came in. Not a man I recognized. 30 or thereabouts, with a close-trimmed mustache he'd grown to look older and a quality coat that told you he worked indoors for someone who had money. He had a folded paper in his hand, and he was tapping it against the countertop while he talked, the way men do when they think the tapping will move things along. "A simple adjustment," he was saying. "Every merchant in Morrow Creek has agreed to it. You'd be the last holdout." "I haven't agreed," Nessa said. She was behind the counter with her hands flat on the surface, very still, not braced, just settled, like she had no particular interest in being moved. "Mrs. Birch, the price I charge for flour is a price I set based on what I pay for it and what margin makes the business work. I've been doing that for 4 years. I don't intend to change the method. The council has recommended a unified pricing structure for." "The council," she said, "doesn't own this store. If they'd like to, they can come in with the purchase price and we'll talk." I picked a tin of coffee off the shelf and brought it to the far end of the counter, giving them space. The man in the coat looked at me once, decided I wasn't relevant, and looked back at Nessa. "You're making this difficult," he said. The tone of it, the particular tone, was one I'd heard before. The kind of tone that's not quite a threat but is trying to feel like one. "I'm making it clear," she said. "Those are different things. Have I failed to be clear about something?" He didn't answer that. He set the folded paper on the counter, smoothed it once with his palm, and walked out. The door closed. I set the coffee tin down. "New in town," I said. "Porter Crane." She looked at the paper but didn't pick it up yet. "He works for Aldous Boone." I knew Boone by name and not much else. He'd come into the valley the previous spring, bought 3 parcels of land on the south end, made noise about a lumber mill. The kind of man who arrives somewhere and immediately starts rearranging it to suit himself, then calls that progress. What's he want you to raise your prices for? She picked up the paper and unfolded it, read it, folded it back. Haverfords and Dunn and Sons both started buying their dry goods from a warehouse Boone operates in Hadley back in June. Better terms, supposedly. What they're actually getting is a better deal now in exchange for coordinating their prices with his direction later. And you buy from the same mill in Teller's Crossing I've bought from since Warren and I opened the store. The quality's better and so's the price. I passed the savings along. She set the paper under the counter. If I raise to match them, my customers have one choice of price. Once Boone controls the supply, they have one choice of product too. I thought about that while I paid for the coffee. I was still thinking about it when I got back to the livery and got my fire going for the evening, and I was thinking about it when I sat down to eat my beans alone. It was a straightforward kind of scheme, the way a lot of schemes are straightforward once you see them from far enough back. The complexity is always in the details, which are hidden. The shape of the thing is usually simple. I didn't see much of her the next 2 weeks. I delivered Pruitt's wagon on Friday morning as promised, without comment, and he paid me without comment, and that was that. I had a stretch of work that kept me busy, 2 horses from a ranch 30 miles out that needed full resets, a buckboard with a cracked tongue that took a day of careful splinting and wrapping before I trusted it to hold, and the weather went from cold to genuinely hostile, a hard wind out of the north that found every gap in the livery walls and made itself known. I was in the middle of retacking a harness when she came in. It was late afternoon, the light already going flat outside. She had her heavy wool coat buttoned to the throat and a pine green scarf wrapped around most of her lower face against the wind, and she was carrying a ledger under her arm, pressed against her side, held with both her arm and her hand in a way that wasn't casual. The way you carry something you're not going to set down. I set the harness on the bench. "Mr. Rourke," she said, "do you have a minute?" Not quite a question. I pulled a stool out from against the wall to a clean spot near the forge, where it was warm. She sat on it and set the ledger on her knees and took a breath, not nervously but like a person who has thought carefully about what they're about to say and is making sure they start at the right place. "I need someone to look at something," she said. "Someone who doesn't owe anything to the town council, and doesn't owe anything to Boone and isn't going to run and tell either of them what they've seen before I've had a chance to decide what to do with it." "That's a short list in a town this size," I said. "You're on it." She opened the ledger. It was a standard account book, the kind you could order from any dry goods supplier. She'd sold a dozen like it herself over the years, but what was inside it wasn't her store accounts. It was something else. Columns of figures, dates, initials, reference numbers I didn't immediately recognize. "Warren kept 2 sets of books," she said, "one for the store, which I still use, one for what he called his other concerns." She smoothed the edge of a page with her thumb. "He was on the town council for 2 years before he died. He wasn't a dishonest man, but he knew what was happening and he kept a record of it. He said someday it might matter." I sat on the edge of the workbench. Boone, his given name might not be Boone, Warren wasn't sure, came through this valley about 10 years ago, quietly. He had a different arrangement then, different business front. He bought water rights from a rancher named Calloway who was already overextended on a loan. Then Calloway missed payments on that loan. The loan was held by a small bank in Hadley. She paused. Warren found out that Boone had a silent share in that bank. I looked at the page she had opened. The columns came into focus. Dates, names, loan amounts, bank reference numbers in a different hand, Warren's hand probably, or a clerk's, and the initials. I knew 3 of them. "Those council members," I said. 4 of the current 5. 3 of them were aware of what they were part of. One wasn't, Warren believed, or was told enough to be useful without knowing the whole picture. But the water rights are the point. Boone went through this 3 times that Warren could document. Different names he used, different parcels, same method. A struggling landowner, a loan, a bank he had a piece of, a default that transferred the rights. And if he controls the water from here to the North Fork, he controls who farms and who runs cattle and eventually who stays and who goes. She closed the ledger. The mill is the part people can see. It's not the part that matters. The forge behind me put out a steady low heat. Outside I could hear the wind picking up again, working at the eave. One of the horses stirred in its stall and settled. "What do you need from me?" I said. "There's a man in the county assessor's office named Whitfield. He's been investigating land title irregularities in this county for 2 years. He's not connected to Boone. Warren checked more than once. He's been asking questions, but he's been missing the piece that ties the bank to the water rights transfers. This ledger is that piece." She looked at me steadily. "I need to get to the county seat. I can't make the ride alone, not because I'm not able, but because if I'm seen leaving town carrying anything, I know what that looks like and I know what happens to me before I come back. I need someone to ride with me." 30 miles, I said. 32 by the North Road. 28 if you take the creek route, but the ford's high this time of year. I'd taken the North Road twice. It was manageable. A long day out and a long day back, or a night at the way station midway and back the next morning. Who else knows about this ledger? No one. Warren hid it well. I found it when I was going through his papers the 2nd year after he died, when I finally had the stomach to go through all of them. I thought about Prout and the axle pin. I thought about Crane and his folded paper and his tapping on her counter. I thought about the 4-year shape of my life in this town, which was useful and competent and entirely unremarked upon. "I'll take you," I said. She looked at me. That same careful look she'd given the ledger, except different. It lasted just a beat. "I'll go with you," she said, "not instead." "I know," I said, "that's what I meant." She nodded once like that was settled. "I'd also like it if you called me Nessa." "All right," I said, "Nessa." We left the next morning before first light. I had my bay mare Clover, who was solid and trustworthy and knew the North Road, and the roan I'd been boarding for a man gone east who wasn't due back until November. The roan was younger and a little more opinionated than Clover, but sound. Nessa rode him without any apparent concern. She had the ledger in a leather satchel strapped across her body, under her coat. The cold hit us immediately coming out of town. That kind of October cold that's not yet winter but is done pretending to be fall. It gets into your neck and the backs of your hands, and it doesn't let go until you've been moving long enough to generate some heat from the inside out. The horses were willing. That helped. We didn't talk much for the first hour, just rode. The sky went through its changes, black, then the dark blue that comes before any real color, then pink edging up over the eastern ridges, and the frost on the grass caught that light and held it for a minute before the sun got high enough to start working on it. A hawk went over us, heading south. Far off to the west, a line of cottonwoods showed yellow. She was watching the ridgeline when she spoke. "Warren used to say the trouble with good men is they mistake silence for peace," she said. "He meant himself as much as anything. He kept this ledger for 2 years and never showed it to anyone while he was alive." "He showed it to you eventually," I said. "He left it where I'd find it, that's a different thing." She was quiet a moment. "He was afraid. I don't blame him for it. Boone has reach. Has it still, as far as I know. And Warren was sick the last few months, not thinking with all of his mind. I think he just ran out of time and decided hiding the ledger well was the most he could manage." "And you?" "I was afraid too," she said. "For a while. A good long while if I'm being honest about it. I waited. Crane coming into my store and talking to me like I was a problem in need of a solution, not even a person, just an obstacle in the way of the next thing he needed to do. That changed something. She looked at the road ahead. I've spent a long time making myself easy to overlook, keeping things smooth, not asking for more than I was likely to get, taking up as little space as I could so people would feel comfortable around me and maybe treat me decent because of it. She said all of it without bitterness, just evenly, like she was reporting on an experiment. And then I looked at that man and I thought, they're going to take what they want regardless, so I might as well do what I actually think is right. I didn't have much to add to that. It was as clear a statement of a thing as I'd heard in a long time. I thought about how long a person has to carry something before they can say it that plainly. She'd been carrying it a while. We rode for a stretch without talking, which by then had become comfortable. Not the quiet of two strangers who have run out of things to manage between them, but the different kind, the kind where the silence is also a form of company. I don't know another way to describe it. Some people you can be quiet with. It's not nothing. We made good time. The road was hard-packed from the dry fall, and Clover set a comfortable pace, and the roan matched it without being asked. I'd done enough long rides alone that having someone beside me felt strange at first. You notice the sound of a second set of hooves, the small adjustments you make to your pace when you're not the only one setting it. After an hour or so, it stopped feeling strange and started feeling like how it was supposed to be, which was its own kind of information. Around mid-morning, she pointed out a hawk that had been following us at a distance for the better part of a mile, riding the updraft off the ridge to the east, working the fields below for anything that moved in the grass. We watched it for a while. When it dropped and came back up empty, we kept going. My father was a farrier, she said, some while after the hawk was gone, before he got the cough and had to stop. That's so. He used to say the best thing about horses is they can't lie to you. They either trust you or they don't, and you know which one in about 30 seconds. That's accurate, I said. He said the second best thing about them is they don't care what you look like. She said it simply, not fishing for anything, just putting a piece of herself on the table the way you do when you've decided someone's worth trusting with it. I kept my eyes on the road. Your mare, she said. Clover, she's a good horse. The best I've owned, I said. Bought her off a man outside of Glenwood who didn't know what he had. He thought she was slow because she wouldn't push. She wasn't slow, she was just deliberate. She thinks before she moves. I like that in a horse. You like that in people too, I'd wager. I thought about it. I like it when they bother to think, I said. Whether they move fast or slow after that is their own business. She laughed, brief, genuine. By mid-morning we were at the creek crossing that marked the county line. The ford was manageable, knee-high on the horses, and by noon we were coming into Hadley. The county seat was 3 times the size of Morrow Creek, maybe more. Real Main Street, hotel, 2 banks, a newspaper office. I'd been there twice in my 4 years. Nessa hadn't been since before Warren died, she told me. The county assessor's office was on the 2nd floor of the courthouse building. We tied the horses at the rail outside and went in. A clerk on the 1st floor told us Whitfield was upstairs and pointed us at a narrow staircase. Whitfield turned out to be a man in his middle 50s, compact and precise, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and ink on 3 of his fingers on the right hand. The kind of man who keeps the surface of his desk clear because he needs room to think, and because a cluttered desk slows down the thinking. He was that kind of tidy. He looked at us when we came in, Nessa first, then me. He didn't say anything, just looked, waiting to understand what kind of visit this was. My name is Nessa Birch, she said. I have something you've been looking for. She took the ledger out of the satchel and set it on his desk. He looked at it. Then he picked it up with both hands carefully, not greedily, and opened it to the first page and didn't say anything for a considerable time. I stood by the window. The room was warm, and through the glass I could see the main street of Hadley going about its business, freight wagons and horses and people walking. ordinary life. Who kept this? He said finally. My husband, Warren Birch. He was on the Morrow Creek Town Council for 2 years before he died 4 years ago. He's been dead of fever since then. Whitfield looked up at her. And you're bringing this now? I'm bringing it now, she said simply. He looked at the ledger again, turned a few pages with care. The Calloway transfer. I've been trying to establish the bank connection on the Calloway transfer for 1.5 years. He pressed his palm flat on the open page gently, like he was confirming it was real. This is that connection. He asked us to sit down. He asked questions for the better part of an hour. Nessa did most of the talking, which was right. It was her story. And I filled in what I knew of the current situation in town. The warehouse arrangement, the pricing pressure on the merchants, the way Crane had been working the Main Street businesses one at a time. Whitfield wrote everything down in a separate notebook with the same care he'd given the ledger, fast and precise. Before we left, he told Nessa the ledger would be in the State Land Commissioner's hands within the week, and that she should expect either a formal visit or a letter within 30 days. Is she at risk? I said. I hadn't planned to say it. It came out before I'd decided. Whitfield looked at me, long enough to understand the question behind the question. Then he looked at Nessa. Less risk than if this stays buried, he said. That's the honest answer. It wasn't everything I wanted to hear, but it was the truth, which is what you want from the right people. A comfortable lie is easy to find. You have to work for the useful truth. He walked us to the door. In the hallway outside his office, he stopped and looked at Nessa one more time. Your husband did a careful thing, he said, keeping this the way he kept it. The dates are exact, the reference numbers are verifiable. It's the best documented case I've seen come through this office in 8 years. Nessa looked at him. He was a careful man, she said, about the things he cared about. Whitfield nodded. Then he went back inside and closed his door, and we went down the narrow staircase and back out into the cold of Hadley's Main Street, where the horses were waiting at the rail, and the afternoon had gone pale and thin, and the ride back was in front of us. On the way back, the sky clouded over and the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Not threatening yet, just reminding you who was in charge. We stopped at the way station 12 miles south of Hadley, a rough place, not much to it, a fireplace, a woman named Ulla who sold coffee and hard biscuits and didn't ask questions, which in a place like that is a form of courtesy. We sat at the table nearest the fire, our coats still on. The coffee was poor quality and very hot. I held my cup with both hands. Thank you, Nessa said. She was looking at the table, not at me. I rode a horse and stood in a room, I said. You did the rest. I needed someone with me. I wasn't wrong about that. She wrapped both hands around her own cup. I've asked for help maybe 4 times in the last 4 years. Since Warren, you know how many of those times it came easily. None of them, I guessed. Once, the Reverend's wife helped me carry a load of flour sacks off a wagon when my back gave out last winter. That was the once. She looked at the fire. I stop myself before I even ask, usually, because I'm afraid of the look on their face. I understood that, more than I wanted to say, which was something I'd have to figure out. People treat you like you're not there, she said. The shift in direction was quiet. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. I've noticed it with you. You fix their horses and their wagons and you do it right and they just move on, like it happened on its own. She looked at me then. You let them. Probably, I said. I do the same thing, she said. I've been doing it a long time. Make yourself easy, keep yourself small, maybe they'll like you better. Maybe they'll treat you decent if you don't take up too much of their attention. Has it worked? I said. The corner of her mouth moved, not even a little bit. I laughed, a short sound, genuine. She smiled properly then, and it changed her face, not into a different face, just more of the same one. We should stop doing it, she said, both of us. The fire popped. Outside, the wind had come up and was doing something to the eave of the way station, a low working sound. Clover and the roan were in the shelter out back. I could hear one of them shift. She put her hand on the table, near mine. Not on it, just near it, in the way a person does when they mean something without wanting to arrive ahead of where you are. "I see you," she said. "I've seen you for a while. I want you to know that. What you did today, what kind of man you are. I've been watching that without saying so for longer than is probably polite." I looked at her. Her face in the firelight was plain and honest, and she wasn't saying it to be kind. She was saying it because it was true, and she'd decided, in the way she'd decided to take the ledger to Hadley, that it needed to be said, and she was the one who was going to say it. "I know what it is to be seen. I mean really seen, your actual self, the one underneath the quietness and the competence and the years of being furniture to other people. Most of my life I hadn't been, so I knew exactly what it felt like when it happened, because it felt like nothing else. I'm going to say something," I said, "and it's probably going to come out sideways because I don't have a lot of practice at it." She waited. "I'd like to keep being someone you see," I said. She was quiet a moment, a real moment, not a polite pause. Then she put her hand over mine. "Just set it there, warm and solid and not moving." "I'm not going anywhere," she said. We got back into Morrow Creek after dark. I put up the horses, checked their feet, gave them hay and water. Nessa went home. Simple as that. No one said anything to either of us that night. In the weeks that followed, I kept expecting something to happen faster. Some sign that Boone or his man Crane had noticed, or that word had gotten back through the council. But it was quiet. Crane came by the dry goods store twice more, Nessa told me later. She sent him away both times. I kept my head down and did my work, the same way, but not quite alone anymore. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times, she would come by the livery in the evening with food she'd cooked, nothing elaborate. A pot of something, cornbread once. A venison stew another time, a ham she'd bought from the Dutchman south of town. And we'd sit on the stools near the forge and eat and talk until the fire had gone down enough that you could feel the night coming in through the walls. Or I'd walk up to her kitchen after I'd cleaned up, and she'd have the stove going and coffee on, and her account books pushed to the side of the table to make room. She talked about growing up in Missouri. The third of 5 children, the only one who'd stayed behind for a few years to help her mother, while the others went west or east for work. How she'd come to Morrow Creek as a young woman with Warren, who had $10 and a plan to open a store, which he did, and which had worked. How she'd thought for a long time she was going to have a very ordinary life, and how she'd made her peace with that, and how peace with something and contentment with it were not the same. She talked about Warren too, and I appreciated that she did, because some people think you shouldn't speak of the dead to the living, and I've never understood that. He'd been a good man, from what she said. Not a complicated man, but not a simple one either. Someone who tried to do right and mostly managed it and got confused when the world required more than that. She didn't make him into a saint, and she didn't make him smaller than he was, and that told me a lot about her. One evening she told me about the winter 2 years after he died, when the store had a bad quarter, and she'd had to decide whether to sell. She'd gone over the books 4 nights running, alone at this same kitchen table, and come within a night of writing the letter to a buyer in Hadley who she knew would have taken the property. And then on the 5th night she'd done the math again and found she'd been adding a column wrong. The quarter wasn't good, but it wasn't catastrophic. She'd put the letter in the stove and gone to bed. "I think about that sometimes," she said, "how close things were, if I'd mailed that letter before I found the mistake." "But you didn't," I said. "No." She looked at the table. "I think about all the things I almost did that I didn't do, the version of my life where I sold the store, the version where I burned the ledger when I found it because I was afraid." She was quiet a moment. "I'm glad I didn't. Is that a strange thing to say?" "No," I said. "I'm glad things are exactly as they are," she said. Right now, at this table, I don't think I've been able to say that in a long time. I told her about things I didn't usually talk about. The time in the cavalry, which I keep abbreviated because most of it isn't worth repeating, and a few parts of it are things I've never said out loud to anyone, and I'm not starting now. A year in Colorado working a mine that went bust in a spectacularly complete fashion. 2 years on a cattle drive that ended badly, in a place and a way I don't go back to in my mind if I can help it. And then the years of working my way through different liveries, different towns, until I came to Chandler's on a horse with a loose shoe, and Chandler put her up and fixed the shoe himself, which he was good at, and then told me he needed help and was there any chance I knew the work. There was. I did. And I stayed. But you never made it your own, she said one evening. We were at her kitchen table late, the lamp turned low. Fully your own. No, I said. Why not? I looked at the lamp, thought about it genuinely. I think I was always waiting to see if it was going to ask me to leave, I said. If I didn't put too much into it, if I didn't expect too much from it, the leaving wouldn't cost so much when it came. She shook her head slow. Towns don't ask, they just stop seeing you and eventually you take the hint. That's about right. You shouldn't have let it. Neither should I. She reached across and touched my arm briefly, one definite touch, like the period at the end of a sentence. We're going to stop doing that. Not a suggestion. I said all right. The letter came on a Tuesday, 5 weeks after we'd made the ride to Hadley. I was sharpening a set of pulley knives when I heard her come in, not a knock, just the door, because she'd started coming in without knocking a couple weeks prior, and I'd started to notice I was listening for it. She held up the letter. It was sealed, County Assessor's Office return. She hadn't opened it yet. Not at home, she said. I wanted to open it with you. We opened it there in the doorway of the livery, with the morning light coming in behind us and the smell of iron and straw around us, and Clover putting her head out of her stall to see what was happening. Whitfield had done exactly what he said. The State Land Commissioner's office had opened a formal inquiry into water rights transfers in our county. 3 of the 4 transfers documented in Warren's ledger were being reversed pending audit. The council members named in the ledger were being required to appear before the county board within 60 days. And Aldous Boone, whose legal name, the letter noted, appeared to be Aldous Greer, from Calhoun County, was being referred to the county prosecutor on charges relating to fraudulent bank instruments going back 11 years. Nessa folded the letter with great care and put it in her coat pocket. Warren would have wanted to see this, she said. He would have been glad, I said, and sorry he hadn't done it himself. Yes, she looked at the street through the open door. A dog was crossing, not in any hurry. Someone's chickens had gotten into the road and were working their way along the edge of the hardware store. Morrow Creek on a Tuesday morning, same as any. But he couldn't, so I did. She said it without pride and without blame, just the plain true fact of it. Then she looked at me the way she'd looked at that letter, except it was the different version, the one I'd been learning to recognize. Come to supper tonight, she said. I'm going to cook something real. I don't mind dried beans, I said. I know you don't. That's not the standard I'm aiming for. I said I'd be there at 7. She cooked venison stew. I don't know where she got the venison. She said a farmer south of town who owed her a favor from the time she'd extended him credit through a hard winter. But it was the kind of stew that smells like the whole afternoon it was cooking, that fills a kitchen up with warmth before you even sit down. She'd put cornbread on the side, and there were pickled beets from her cellar, and she'd put a cloth on the table, which she hadn't done the other evenings I'd been over. I noticed the cloth. I didn't say so. We ate. The stew was as good as it had promised to be. She kept the lamp on the table turned up, which she usually didn't, and the light was warm and the stove was going, and it was the most comfortable I'd been in a long time, possibly in years, in the specific way that has nothing to do with temperature or furniture, and everything to do with who you're sitting across from. After supper, she went to the high shelf in the kitchen and took down a bottle. Brown glass, no label, the cork just set in the top. "Warren bought this the year we came to Morrow Creek," she said. "The first year the store turned a profit. He said we'd drink it when something was worth celebrating." She set it on the table and looked at it for a moment. "I've been waiting for something that felt worth it." She poured 2 glasses. Rye, dark and well-aged, smooth enough that you could smell the oak in it. We drank. The window showed dark and the town outside was quiet, and the stove ticked as it cooled a little. "What happens now?" I said. She looked at her glass and then at me. She knew what I meant. "Now," she said, "I stop pretending I don't think about you more than I think about most other things in a given week." She set the glass down, and there was no ceremony in it. It was just a practical thing to do so her hands were free. "And I'd ask you to stop treating yourself like a man who's just passing through somewhere, because you're not. Morrow Creek is your home. You've put 4 years into this place and you know every horse in it, and you've held the livery together since Chandler's lungs gave out, and that matters, and I'd like it if you knew it mattered." She paused. "And I'd like to be a part of that, of your life here, if that's what you want." She looked at me straight. The lamp was between us and her face was in good light, and she wasn't asking to be kind or because she didn't know the answer. She was asking because she was the kind of person who says the thing plainly once and then waits. I'd been quiet about what I felt for a long time. Not shy exactly, just unaccustomed. Unused to the idea that what I felt was something someone else would want to know. But I told her we were going to stop doing that. Small promises matter. You keep them even when keeping them is harder than you expected. "Yes," I said, "that's what I want." She nodded, took both my hands in hers across the table, big hands, capable hands, the hands of a woman who'd run a store alone for 4 years and ridden 30 miles in October cold, with a ledger full of evidence pressed against her chest, and sat across from a county official, and said this is what happened, clearly and without apology, and she held them and looked at them for a moment like she was taking stock. "Good," she said. That was all good, and it was. The formal proceedings took the better part of the following year, the way legal things do. 2 of the named council members resigned from the council within the first month. One of them left Morrow Creek altogether, went to stay with a brother in Denver, and as far as I know didn't come back. The water rights reversals went through slowly, with challenges and counter-challenges and a great deal of paperwork, but they went through. The original landowners or their heirs got most of what had been taken. Aldous Greer, the man who'd been calling himself Boone, was arrested in March in a town 3 counties south, where it turned out he'd been running a smaller version of the same scheme. He'd had a good run, 11 years of it. It ended in a county jail outside of Meridian with a county prosecutor who, from what Whitfield wrote to Nessa, seemed deeply pleased to have found him. Porter Crane simply wasn't there one morning. The kind of man who exists in relation to someone else's scheme can't exist without the scheme. He went somewhere. I don't know where, and I didn't ask. Haverfords and Dunn and Sons went back to buying from honest suppliers once the warehouse arrangement collapsed. Prices dropped back to where they'd been. People's lives went on. That's the thing about correcting a wrong that's been going on for years. When it's corrected, the world doesn't suddenly look different. It just goes back to looking the way it was supposed to look. The ordinariness is the point. Nessa's store did well. She extended her stock that winter, added some tools, a better selection of fabric, medicines that people had been riding to the next town for, and farmers from 2 or 3 homesteads south started coming in who hadn't been coming before. Some of them brought their wives. Some of them stood in the store and talked to Nessa for 20 minutes about one thing or another, and she knew what they needed and she knew how to talk to people, which was something she'd always known but which she was doing more freely now. I watched her do it sometimes. I'd come by in the afternoon to pick up something or other, and I'd stand in the doorway for a moment before I went in, and I'd see her at the counter with someone, talking, and the look on her face. Easy, direct, A little sharp the way her mind was, sometimes amused, and I'd think about what it cost her to have kept all of that smaller than it was for so long. What it costs a person. Years of it. The particular kind of tired that comes not from working hard, but from working at keeping yourself from taking up the space you're owed. I knew something about that tired. I'd been carrying my version of it for most of my life. So I recognized it on her, and I recognized when it started to lift. That winter she got her prices right, not raised them the way Crane had wanted, but set them the way she'd always set them, fair and clear, and stopped apologizing for it in the small invisible ways she'd been apologizing. She stopped softening her voice when she corrected a wrong measure or caught a short payment. She stopped thanking people twice for business they'd have brought her anyway because she was the best option in town. Small things, hard to name unless you'd been watching. I'd been watching. And then I'd go in and she'd look up and that look would shift to a different one. And I still have no adequate language for what that meant to me, so I'll leave it at, I knew. I moved my things into her house in December, after a visit to the Methodist minister that was official and polite, and considerably less efficient than we'd have managed on our own. We stood in his parlor on a Wednesday afternoon and said what needed saying in front of the Reverend and his wife and the snow coming down outside the window, and then we went home and had supper. She cooked. I washed the dishes, which she thought was funny for some reason she never explained and which I took to mean she just never lived with someone who did that. The following spring I put my name on the livery building, not just the lease, the deed. Nessa had opinions about getting that done, strong and specific ones, and she stated them clearly over the course of 3 suppers until I went and did it. My name on a piece of land in Morrow Creek, the first time that had been true anywhere in my life. Calvin Rourke, right there in the land registry book at the courthouse, in the same building where Whitfield had his office. I went by the assessor's office when I was there. Whitfield was at his desk. He looked up. "Everything settled," he said. "On our end," I said. He nodded and went back to his work. I went back to mine. What I know now, that I didn't know before all of this, is something I'm going to have a hard time saying plainly without it sounding like either more or less than it is. So I'll try and you can take it or leave it. I was the same man in the spring of that year that I'd been in the October before. Same hands, same work, same ways. The livery ran the same. I still got up before light. I still knew which horses needed watching and which could be trusted, and the difference between a shoe that'll hold for a week and one that'll hold for 2 years. Nothing changed. Except that someone knew those things about me. Not knew of them in the way a town knows a man does his job, but knew them the way you know a person when you've actually looked, when you've decided to look and then kept looking. Nessa knew them. She'd made it plain that she knew them once clearly in a way station off the North Road with bad coffee on the table and a fire going low. And then she'd kept right on knowing them, every day since, with the steady matter-of-fact quality she brought to everything that mattered to her. I don't have a way to tell you what that does to a man who's been useful his whole life without being seen. I don't think it can be translated. It's something you feel in the morning, a particular kind of morning, when the light comes in through a window that's yours and the stove in the next room is going because someone got up before you did and put the coffee on, and the day in front of you is a day you're allowed to be in. Not passing through. Allowed to be. That's what it is, finally, being allowed to be somewhere. Not because you've earned it by staying small and staying quiet and keeping your needs invisible, but because someone looked at you clearly at the whole actual thing, the competence and the age and the 49 years of useful quiet and the walls you'd built up without knowing you'd built them, and said, yes, that's enough, more than enough, that's exactly what I want. Nessa never flinched from me, not once in all of it, not on the cold road to Hadley, not when I said the sideways thing in the way station, not in her kitchen with the letter and the rye, not on the December Wednesday in front of the minister, not on any morning since. I keep working, I keep getting up before light. I know every horse in Morrow Creek, and I keep knowing them the way I always have, the way I've always done everything I care about, which is completely, without cutting corners, without looking for credit. The work is the same. I am the same. The livery is mine now, on paper, which is something I used to think I didn't need to feel any particular way about, and which I now know was wrong. It matters. Putting your name on a thing, the thing you've built and held and kept running, it matters more than I was willing to admit when I thought it was out of reach. Some mornings I walk from the house to the livery in the dark, before anyone else in town is moving, and the street is empty and the cold is clean and the stars are still up over the eastern ridge. And I think, this street, this town, these horses that need me, and this work that's mine, and this life I am allowed to be inside of. Not passing through, not enduring, inside of. That's the thing she gave me. Not the name on the deed, not the supper, not the hand over mine in the way station, though all of that too. The thing underneath all of that, the permission to be where I was, to stop waiting to be asked to leave. And when I come home in the evening, she's there. A good woman, clear-eyed and capable, who made her own hard choice and kept it, and has never once made me feel like something she's enduring. She sees me, has seen me, goes on seeing me. That's all I ever wanted, that's everything,